graduation. And so we are thrilled today to be hosting Dr. Brewer Eberly, who will be giving our Wall Family Speaker Series presentation, Health, Spirituality, and Religion. For the academic year, this is our final talk of the academic year, and then we take a summer hiatus from the speaker series, and we'll start up again in September. So stay tuned for our fall lineup of speakers. And we're excited to have the academic year go out with a bang with Brewer's presentation. So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Brewer Eberly. So Brewer is a third generation family physician at the Fischer Clinic, which is a primary care practice in Raleigh, North Carolina. And he is a McDonald Agape Fellow in the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative at Duke Divinity School. He is the author of the forthcoming program, The Healer's Vocation, a small group for Christians in healthcare, and has been published widely, including JAMA, The New Atlantis, Christianity Today, and Plough. And he's had artwork on the cover of Academic Medicine and in the AMA Journal of Ethics. While the majority of his work is caring for his patients and his family, his scholarship focuses on the intersection of medicine, aesthetics, and Christian theology, with a particular eye towards medical trainee formation, the relationship between beauty and ethics, and the nourishment of weary clinicians. And I just want to say on a personal note, Brewer and I were just talking about this before the talk started. We met at the first Conference of Medicine and Religion that I ever went to about 7 years ago, actually with our founding directors, Doctors Margot and Doug Wall. And I met Brewer when he was a student, and I was so impressed by the way that he spoke about beauty and medicine and theology that I was like, when I grow up, I want to be like him, even though I'm like much older than he is. And I was like, I got to understand like what world this person has been in, and really got me, after that, I've been in the space of medicine and theology and ethics. So it's been an awesome space to live. And it's always really, truly a blessing to hear Brewer speak. And so we're really excited that he's made time out of his very busy schedule to be here today. Brewer, thanks for being here, brother.
Thank you, Kristen. It's very generous words, and all around, it's a great delight to be here with you all today. Thank you. So I'd love to open with a quote. Get the slide to go. There we go. Searching souls among the young recognize their longings will not be satisfied by think tank white papers and reach instead for a new love or an old God. So I had a friend in undergrad who loved Tim Chester's A Meal with Jesus, discovering grace, community, and mission around the table. For him, meals made possible the recognition of neighbor vocation in Christ. And he lived out this belief radically, inviting over friends, strangers with frequent, kind of gratuitous hospitality. We would often take our doors off their hinges just to accommodate the food and fellowship. These were powerful affairs of gathering and belonging that made the scattering and loneliness I experienced in medical training all the more bewildering and disorienting. I craved, and since that others craved, tables where we might gather and grow community, reaffirm our mission, and even discover grace. As I've listened to the lament and the laughter and the longings of friends working across healthcare over the last 10 years between medical school residency and now being 3 years into practice, I've often thought of Luke 24 and the road to Emmaus, where weary disciples encounter Christ after walking a long road together. Though the disciples receive teaching directly from Christ himself, they do not recognize him until seated around a table in the breaking of bread. Only then do they recall for burning within them, rising from their chairs to rejoin their community and share, quote, what happened on the road. There are many ways, to tell the story of medicine's weariness and contemporary heartache. Burnout and moral injury tend to lead the conversation, though you'll also encounter words like disenchantment, systemic injustice. There are so many ways to tell this story of the kind of malaise and heartache that I sense in so many who choose to practice medicine. But there are also many ways to tell the story of medicine's goodness and hope for revival, which will depend on many tiers of care and creation, from institutional reformation to residential programs and parallel communities of counter formation like the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative that I hail from, to small groups meeting quietly, intentionally, underground, in upper rooms, setting a table over which we might break bread and discover grace, community, and mission. So to draw on my friend, psychiatrist and theologian Warren Kinghorn, engaging healthcare, as I have come to see it as a Christian, is not just a matter of working extra hard to add a layer of Christ-like compassion to an already overextended patient schedule, but rather first to back up and allow ourselves to experience ourselves and others in a radically different way, formed not by the efficiency and mechanistic language of modern healthcare, but formed by the vision that we are God's beloved creatures who hunger, thirst, weep, and long for something more. In that light, we might discover we are walking a road shared by healers who are also weary amidst their good work, eager to recognize Christ in the bodies of the sick, and the mystery, burden, and hope of that work, that love and witness need not be scarce in the practice of medicine. So this vision has captured my imagination around professional identity formation since I first sat down next to Kristen 7 years ago. Rather than on elective small groups, which by definition suggests something highly optional, I wanted to imagine something part and parcel with physicianship, forums and underground resistance gatherings, if you will, that run parallel to the regular formation that a medical student receives. Communities where we could interrogate what it is we are called to be and who we are becoming. So I became deeply interested in this parallel polis idea, what John Paul II called moral micro-societies, what Wendell Berry called local adaptation or paideia, which is the importance of small moral communities that create and sustain, quote, a better way to live that the rest of us might copy, in the words of David Brooks. My aim was to not only restore meaning and joy to medical training, but to move past isolated post hoc additions to professionalism competency measures or humanities electives by developing longitudinal communities of friends and compelling clinical conferences that seek to sustain both a rich moral discourse among medical trainees, while also inspiring and equipping practical, clear, and personalized habit formation that would find its clarity and encouragement first through hospitality and friendship. I'll offer some concrete examples and then turn more to the kind of themes that of bread, beauty, and belonging that have undergirded these projects. So the first of these was phronesis, meaning practical wisdom, which was designed as a forum for medical student formation, organized around 12 key conversations I sensed as a student were conspicuously absent from medical education, including things like wisdom, practical wisdom as medicine's indispensable virtue, in the words of Edmund Pellegrino and David Tomasma. Health is membership. What does it actually mean to conceive of the patient as kind of irrevocably bound up in their community? Medical professionalism and even the very concept of moral formation was not a phrase that I heard throughout medical training, and yet we were being formed in a very distinct way. What might it mean to attend and pay attention, and to understand that when we invoke that word attending of senior clinicians, we are making a claim towards one who has practiced a kind of art of seeing and reaching out towards others. That's what attention means in Latin, attendare, to reach out or stretch towards. So we gather monthly in a local brewery or an attending's home where we ask two big questions. How are we being formed or malformed in medical training, given this evening's topic? And then how should I then live and practice with wisdom? So I ran this as a fourth year med student, and then again as a second and third year resident. Today, I have the great honor of co-directing the Good Surgeon Project at Duke, founded and led by my dear friend, Ryan Antiel, there on the left, pediatric surgeon, where surgical residents gather monthly over a shared meal in Ryan's home, exploring questions similar to phronesis, but tuned towards the surgical community. So questions like, what are we striving towards? What are all my efforts towards here? Who are my people? Am I doing this alone, or am I in a community a faculty of friends among my surgical colleagues. Who is my patient? Who are my patient's people? How do we live and fare forward after failure, after making a mistake? How do we bear the brokenness and suffering we encounter? We also meet in a local art museum. This is one of our early groups meeting, as well as with some surgical faculty. We're actually going to the ballet this Friday to witness the body in a different way than what medical training forms us to witness the body within. And we're actually closing our final session tonight. So, good surgeons are on my mind today, on my heart today. So yeah, I thought I might actually read from you. We prepare these little cards that we often look at poetry together. And so we'll print these cards to give out just as small gifts to the residents each month. And tonight's kind of special in that we have almost like a benediction of sorts that takes the kind of high points of each session over the last year and have been kind of collated into a sort of send-off statement. And I thought I might read it because I think it combines a lot of themes from this project. Flourishing requires more than the resume virtues. To flourish, we must first recognize that we belong to a moral community that clarifies our aims and practices and gives us a place to develop practical wisdom. Within this community, we begin to cultivate the art of attention so important to caring well for patients as attending surgeons. To pay attention includes listening long to stories with fidelity, beholding our patients such that we become trustworthy. And part of that trustworthiness includes paying attention to and witnessing the communities that make our patients' lives possible. Communities that deserve particular attention are the poor, the marginalized, and the outcast, who can sometimes teach us to expand our imagination of what it might mean to flourish in a wounded world. As you encounter suffering and brokenness, approach it not as an expert, but as a fellow human who can always care even when you cannot cure. Renewal and the possibility for change is possible when even a small group of surgeons find a better way to live. Together, we can help each other out of the cave, welcoming others with hope for better practice. So friends, go with your love to the fields, practice resurrection. So I recognize some of that language highly dependent upon readings we engage throughout the year, like Plato's Cave and a poem by Wendell Berry. And I realize it's a little weird to kind of see all those things strung together, but I wanted to share it because I wanted to give a sense of how this project has allowed for very candid, thick language around what it is we're doing here in medicine, where even the language of practicing resurrection might be risked in a group of surgical residents. Duke surgery, maybe I can't say this publicly. Well, I won't say this publicly, but let's just say that the surgical world is marked by pretty intense stories of broken relationships, some of which find physicians almost boasting about them. And you often find this in the highest places. And so it's been a great gift to see these residents hunger and thirst for something more and to participate in that. So this project is also echoed in places like Wake Forest. This is the Planting Sequoias project led by my dear friend and poet Ethan Stonerook there on the right for their PA school. Ethan's an oncology PA and a narrative medicine expert who leads these groups. They also gather monthly. They also gather over shared meals. They also, Ethan's language, hold out something beautiful as a third thing around which clinicians might ask questions. So it gets a kind of space, vulnerability, and potential to ask very difficult, challenging things. And then finally, as Kristen mentioned, I spent the last several years designing an offering from the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative called the Healer's Vocation, which will sort of be out in full later in the fall, inspired by both the road to Emmaus and our conversations with fellow healthcare workers over the last near decade. And in this small group, we invite Christians from across healthcare disciplines and traditions to gather around shared meals, prayer, scripture, encounters with beautiful things, including music, poetry, and conversation to imagine what difference the Christian faith makes in daily practice. We've designed this according to this framework of bread, beauty, and belonging. So I've given 4 examples contexts: medical school, residency, surgery, oncology, PA school, the Christian community. And what unites each of these efforts is a commitment to these convictions of embodiment, aesthetics, and community. So bread, beauty, and belonging is just an attempt to say those three things more evocatively. So what do we mean by this? By beauty and belonging, especially in healthcare spaces that are often devoid of all three with bread. So busy clinicians often literally neglect bread, skipping lunch or hurrying through meals, and therefore cultivate habits that are transactional and oriented towards production, isolation, and efficiency. I found medical training to often weaken the spirit by first instrumentalizing the body, especially insofar as we treated ourselves like machines who did not need bread so much as fuel, who did not need rest so much as sleep mode. So we cared for patients we saw as machines because we too were living like machines. But we are not machines. We are dust-born creatures with bodies that hunger, tire, and grow. And so we need bread, and ultimately what Christians understand as the bread of life. And when I prioritize the breaking of bread, I sense I'm resisting in a small way the metaphors of industry that so animate the medical mind. Bread is an invitation to walk as if we are creatures who depend. As my pastor said last year, quote, "A meal is not a flashcard or a set of facts or even a story. It is an embodied activity. You live a meal." So when I think about meals I shared with colleagues in residency, these were often occasions for mostly complaining, but they were also moments of precious candor and even moral clarity. And I love how Andre Sarabia, the first president of Communities Organized for Public Service, put it, quote, "The issues are the dessert, not the main meal," end quote. Meals often literally set the table for the discussion that most matters in our lives. I love how the sacred artist Archibald, that's who I keep kind of invoking here in this PowerPoint, captures this moment of the bread just beginning to break open in Christ's hands, just letting the light out before blossoming in this kind of wing-like grace. It's not just that the disciples recognize Christ, Archibald has captured them recognizing each other, right? So the downcast figure on the right, you can almost imagine this guy saying like, "Yeah, man, just like let me pour my drink," but he's now looking up at his neighbor. The Gospel of Luke says that Christ is made known in the breaking of the bread, but I think we are made known to each other too, inviting us not just to connect, but to rekindle compassion. I think of Raymond Carver's short story, "A Small Good Thing," which if you have not read, I encourage you to read it today. It's less than 6,000 words. I think you could read it in a sitting. It's about a young boy who dies after an accident within days of his mother ordering him a birthday cake from the local baker. The baker, unaware of the boy's death, calls the boy's parents randomly in the middle of the night over the course of his hospitalization and death, asking if they have forgotten about the cake and worse, forgotten about their boy, abruptly hanging up before the parents can explain what's happened. So enraged, his parents confront this baker. And after telling him what has happened to their son, they find this unexpected moment of connection and compassion. And I'll just read from the final part of the story. "You probably need to eat something," the baker said. "I hope you'll eat some of my hot rolls. You have to eat and keep going. Eating is a small, good thing in a time like this," he said. He served them warm cinnamon rolls just out of the oven, the icing still runny. He put butter on the table and knives to spread the butter. Then the baker sat down at the table with them. He waited. He waited until they each took a roll from the platter and began to eat. "It's good to eat something," he said, watching them. "There's more. Eat up. Eat all you want. There's all the rolls in the world in here." They ate rolls and drank coffee. Anne was suddenly hungry, and the rolls were warm and sweet. She ate 3 of them, which pleased the baker. And then he began to talk. They listened carefully. Although they were tired and in anguish, they listened to what the baker had to say. They nodded when the baker began to speak of loneliness and of the sense of doubt and limitation that had come to him in his middle years. He told them what it was like to be childless all these years, to repeat the days with the ovens endlessly full and endlessly empty, The party food, the celebrations he'd worked over, icing knuckle deep, the tiny wedding couples stuck into cakes, hundreds of them, no, thousands by now. Birthdays. Just imagine all of those candles burning. He had a necessary trade. He was a baker. He was glad he wasn't a florist. It was better to be feeding people. This was a better smell any time than flowers. Smell this, the baker said, breaking open a dark loaf. It's a heavy bread, but rich. They smelled it. Then he had them taste it. It had the taste of molasses and coarse grains. They listened to him. They ate what they could. They swallowed the dark bread. It was like daylight under the fluorescent trays of lights. And they talked on into the early morning, the high, pale cast of light in the windows, and they did not think of leaving. Eating is a small, good thing in a time like this, especially in a time of this kind of malaise of heartache that I think is within the medical community. Bread reminds us of our creatureliness, fosters the possibility of candor and connection, and offers imagination for recognizing the weary and caring for the wounded. Marcus Aurelius thought there was nothing more beautiful than the cracks on top of a loaf of bread, writing, quote, "The way loaves of bread split open on top in the oven, they rouse our appetite without our knowing why. The shadow of decay gives them a peculiar beauty," which leads me to a second idea that has captured my imagination when thinking about the nourishment of weary clinicians, which is beauty. But what role could beauty have in the work of medicine, marked as it is by the shadow of decay? In his new book, Progress Notes, 1 Year in the Future of Medicine, my friend and fellow physician Abraham Nussbaum quips that there is a death to beauty ratio in medicine. The more suffering we encounter, the more difficult it is to name healthcare as a space in which one might encounter something beautiful. And there's also the problem of efficiency. As a child, my dad, also a family physician, would hand me the covers of JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, from itself. And I have hundreds of these covers saved. My dad, JAMA's cover were a reminder that patient care was what Therese Southgate, which is, she's the physician and art historian who curated JAMA's cover art for decades, called an act of long and loving attention. So you can imagine my disappointment when in 2013, which is the same year I started medical school, and is the same year the majority of physicians would no longer recommend medicine as a career to their children, and the same year Dr. Southgate died, JAMA removed their iconic cover art in favor of the arresting image of a table of contents. So, early press releases were quite clear. Readers wanted, quote, to generate insights and access information more quickly. And look, I get it. I mean, as a family doc, I'm scanning journals quickly for information and insights. But the message was clear to me then, only a few weeks into medical school, that the days of long and loving attention seemed to be changing. A decade later, and it still seems we only have time for short and efficient attention. And while some witness powerfully delight and joy in the art of medicine, for others, the very mention of art seems impotent and brackish in the face of the daily demands of modern practice. I was talking to a friend recently. She was put in charge of a art contest in her medical school. She's on faculty there. And she was telling me how they were encouraged not to allow any submissions that were political or potentially upsetting or offensive. And I grew up training in art before choosing this path, and I can't imagine a worse way to structure an encounter with something beautiful. To engage beauty or any great work of art entails the possibility of disruption and disturbance. This is why we call things awesome and awful. There's a kind of holy fear at work when we encounter something truly beautiful. Beauty can be a threat in some sense because it bears an affinity for truth. And once truth is witnessed, it makes a claim on you. You cannot live the same way you did before. This is why so many, from Augustine to Dante to C.S. Lewis, have claimed beauty as a call. Philosopher Elaine Scarry writes, "When you see something beautiful, it is a call to you to begin to repair the injuries of the world." Beauty creates, without itself fulfilling, the aspiration for enduring certitude. It comes to us with no work of our own and leaves us prepared to undergo a giant labor. I have a patient who has suffered a life of abuse and addiction and restlessness, and I have his permission to share this story, who specifically told me once that an encounter with beauty healed him. Now, he brought this up of his own accord in the room. And I couldn't resist asking him, like, what about the beauty was healing? And he thought for a moment, kind of staring off into this, silver horizon in his mind, before turning back to me with a look of one who's found peace, a kind of stillness, that once you've witnessed it, you can't help but long for it yourself. And he said, quote, "The bad part is gone, but the sad part remains." An encounter with beauty prepared my patient to undergo a giant labor. In his case, finding it bright, not because it glossed over his suffering or merely affirmed his delights, but because it seemed to heal the part that was bad, leaving him sober-minded and empowered, full of wonder where once there was despair. So far from simply repackaging the arts and humanities in medicine, which are interventions I believe in general, but I've written a lot about in terms of critiquing how they're instrumentalized and often sort of glittery-fied, whatever that word would be, the Instagramification of the health humanities, if you will. These interventions have been going on for decades now, right, with very questionable long-term impact on learners or on clinicians in general. But nevertheless, I do think the language of beauty is a richer descriptive approach to the malaise and heartache of modern medicine, in part because it also resists that machine identity language. Because to invoke something like beautiful is to invoke the image of the human creature as one who laments and longs for something more. Wonder, desire, affect, joy, these are inversions of what some have called the Kantian hierarchy, where one begins with truth claims and intellectual assent to ideas. And then once you've sort of maxed the territory of truth, then you can put on your ethical claims. And then beauty and aesthetics become a kind of, unnecessary icing on the cake that if you're lucky, you get to invoke. But I think that's backwards. I think that actually when we sit down together, what tends to move the heart are these questions of desire and wonder and joy and pain and suffering and lament and laughter and longing. And that makes a claim towards what we think is good, which in of itself is a kind of ethical, it's a claim, it's an ethical claim. And then the kind of metaphysics and truth actually tend to come later. But we're meeting each other on a shared road of weariness in which the language of beauty is what's in the air, as I've come to see it. So this is drawing on the success and witness of Catholic evangelists like Robert Barron, who has spearheaded design according to what he calls the Via Pulchritudinis, which is the way of the beautiful. Protestant artists like Makoto Fujimura, who argue beauty is essential to culture care. Greek Orthodox theologians like David Bentley Hart, who have invigorated the connection between beauty, suffering, and self-emptying love, which is critical given medicine's proximity to ugliness and pain. And finally, Elaine Scarry, who I've already mentioned, who is an agnostic philosopher who not only connects beauty to moral action, but claims that beauty is a starting place for education. So I love to prioritize the beautiful because, to quote Virginia Woolf, it is where we discover the thing that is made that endures. And as the late philosopher Roger Scruton put it, when we give beauty, we perform, quote, an act of consecration and thereby put down the real roots of community, which brings me to the idea of belonging. So, the American Medical Association claimed over 97% of eligible American physicians as members in 1962, but only 12% in 2019. So medical workers have been looking elsewhere for their identity and community for decades, coming to a head recently as the New England Journal of Medicine Perspectives by Lisa Rosenbaum and her podcast series, Not Otherwise Specified, made plain last year, kind of struggling to articulate the moral crisis of mission and community in modern medical training. Today's trainees are once rejecting the language of vocation while turning to unions to find companions in their rebellion against a techno-bureaucratic medicine. When my grandfather, he was one of the first family docs when the profession split off from internal medicine in 1969. And he used to talk about when he would go to the local county medical society meetings. Those were not just gatherings where you kind of like rub shoulders and, share cocktails with other docs. That was part of it. He would talk about how there was kind of moral burden placed on being there because you knew who was or was not serving in the local medical clinic. And so the gathering of physicians together had kind of moral weight to it. There was a sense of mapping the need in the local place. Another way to say this a bit more cynically, last week the PR crew of University Hospital, who I'm sure is full of otherwise careful and conscientious writers, posted a picture of the smiling portrait of their volunteer services coordinator above the following poll quote: "Everyone has a sad story. No one cares." And this generated all sorts of schadenfreude, and the text threads and memes were themselves quite funny, of people kind of blaming AI and just wondering what on earth happened here. And part of me wonders, is there actually, as I thought about this, almost like, is there an intentional subversive Hauerwasian truth teller at work on this PR team, kind of claiming a really painful truth that everyone has a sad story, no one cares? There's a sense in which we're not sure as physicians how to gather in community to reform the contours of our community around this sense of sadness and longing. So again, I think the table is set for interventions that not only provide a space for companionship and connection over the burdens being endured, but are a chance to name a moral and spiritual center to medicine that is often left unnamed. The church has always thrived at cultivating community at the margins, what Pope John Paul II, as I said earlier, called emergency micro-societies. Philosopher Bell Hooks calls it the importance of the porch, threshold spaces at the intersections of the intimate and the public, in which we connect and come awake to the needs of our neighbors. I think about this often as a family doctor, that I must be in real relationship with others in order to have the spiritual practice with belonging necessary to encourage the same in my patients and practitioners who are increasingly weary and disconnected. So I believe we are creatures who can only thrive in such relationship. And so, at least for the Christian, belonging, and ultimately to belong within the body of Christ, we are held closer in the love of the Father. And I recognize this language is very distinctly Christian. I'm sort of speaking confessionally and quite candidly right now. I recognize that language won't be compelling or necessarily even welcome, and I don't mean to invoke it crassly like a hammer, but simply from my heart as I've thought about this concept. Practically speaking, if that language is compels something else, it's imagining designing interactions that at a minimum inspire moral recognition. That idea of the bread breaking and light being cast into a room, and desperate neighbors now somehow recognizing each other anew. Ethan Stoneruck, with his PA students, he will invoke at the end of the year language of, here is what I've come to see in you. Here's the fruit I've seen born in you. So I see you becoming. That language cast upon somebody as they launch into their training and into their work. So I mentioned Lisa Rosenbaum's recent series of perspectives and podcasts in the New England Journal of Medicine, which signal just how top of mind the heartache of modern medicine has become, and how bewildered medicine's best educators, innovators, and benefactors are to name it, let alone to heal it. And I think the series came closest to naming the problem when a retired pediatric residency program director pointed bluntly to a lack of love. She said, "You asked me what are my concrete suggestions. I think bring the love back." I've made much of beauty, and it is the word I want to close with here, especially as beauty moves us to love. Roger Scruton, again, warned we are living in a, quote, loveless culture, which is afraid of beauty because it is disturbed by love. Last year, I asked my son, Olive, 6 years old at the time, what makes something beautiful. He was eating and kind of, the furrowed brow, kind of exaggerated concentration. He proclaimed confidently, it's when you see something and you love something. It's when you see something and you love something. That's what I believe these parallel communities can foster at their best. The conditions necessary to see something and love something. And in our context, in our work, to see a patient and love them, to see a wound and love them, to see a learner and love them. Not love that the wound has happened or what it is, but reach out in love towards the wound, seeking the good of the wound, to heal it if possible, but love it always. Meaning lingering with it when it can't be healed, as if it was the kind of thing that we are thankful exists because it makes possible the work. And there's the paradox. Calling a wound beautiful is repulsive and incorrect, wounding the wounded further. And yet being around the wounded creates the conditions for a long and loving attention. And that's true of patients who are wounded. It's true of learners who are wounded. And it's true of clinicians who've been in practice for a long time who are weary and wounded. As Henry Nouwen writes in Behold the Beauty of the Lord, when I was too tired to read the gospel, too restless to have spiritual thoughts, too depressed to find words for God, or too exhausted to do anything, I could still look at these images so intimately connected with the experience of love. It's when you see something and you love something, or perhaps when you see through something and your sight is changed. Because when I behold the wound of another, I see and feel and know a call to heal. And it is one of the clearest marks I know in this life. All chatter and philosophy die down, and I am brought into a naked confrontation with suffering and grief that makes a claim on me. I hear in the silence the need to lament, and I long in the slow regard of the riven things to love my wounded neighbor in small, good ways. Sometimes I reach out my hand, other times I sit and let my presence be enough. Other times I study and labor and go back to the books. The wound is the place where mere Christianity and mere medicine can meet. The wound is a call to weep and to wonder and to work. As Elaine Scarry writes in On Beauty and Being Just, quote, when we come upon beautiful things, they act like small tears in the surface of the world that pull us through to some vaster space. We willingly cede our ground to the thing that stands with us. Christ's wounds have become to me small tears that pull me through to some vaster space. Plato said that when we come across beautiful things, we are reminded of how our soul might sprout wings to ascend. But I think if any account of beauty is to have transformative, transfiguring power in the Christian life and the medical mind, inspiring an ethic that equips the healer and serves the suffering, inspiring small groups of alternative counterformational practices and curricula, then must be an aesthetic of quiet dissent. As Augustine struggles with in Book 8 of Confessions and Book 22 of the City of God, our conception of beauty is indexed in the incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection of Christ. All philosophical accounts of beauty, at least for the Christian, necessarily pass through the cross. The beauty that Dostoevsky famously said would save the world, not because it ascends on platonic wings or makes things easy or pretty, but because it has first descended into death, wings outstretched to be first nailed down. So I'll close with this. You may recognize this altarpiece by Matthias Grunewald. Imagine you are a patient in a hospital. You have wounds that will not heal, and they fester and they smell, and your family has abandoned you, and your friends do not visit you. And each day you look up at this image of this crucified figure whose body twists and writhes in its woundedness. This may have been the experience of the patients who looked up from their beds in the monastery of St. Anthony in Eisenheim, which specialized in hospital work for plague victims. The great artist Gerhard Richter, who is himself an atheist, said that, quote, art is our greatest hope. And this is a statement he made, very interestingly, in front of this altarpiece. So here is this great figure of art pointing over his shoulder, to an artwork featuring someone else pointing over his shoulder. So Richter points to art as our greatest hope. John the Baptist points to Christ crucified. I can assure you that beauty will not heal medicine or nourish those of us who work in healthcare by putting artwork back on the cover of JAMA. I suspect renewal will come through recognizing each other on a shared road, gathering in low-lit rooms, and eating together over small, good things, realizing it's a heavy bread, but rich. And again, I recognize the specific confessional claims of Christianity, especially the incarnation and resurrection and all their metaphysical surprise and particularity, and will not be a compelling counter-formational foundation for all medical educators wondering about professional identity formation in a morally pluralistic, kind of leaning relativistic context. And even within my own tradition, simply invoking bread, beauty, and belonging is not so simple. You know, a meal was the site of the greatest betrayal in the Christian story. Disputes at the greatest. Beauty has a very real history of being weaponized to not only cover over great evil and ugliness, but exclude the broken from the table of belonging. Nevertheless, I believe that the road to Emmaus highlight a framework of bread, beauty, and belonging that innovators and benefactors of professional formation might consider. Eating together, encountering beautiful things, and cultivating spaces of deep friendship are not mere methodological flourishes on the real work of curricular reform, marked by ever more polished reflection exercises. These things are the real work. Launch pads for rediscovering mission, community, and grace. Practices of placemaking and hospitality, where students, trainees, and clinicians of all disciplines might feel their hearts burning within them, maybe even take the doors off their hinges and enter into their work alive, joyfully discovering they do not have to search for think tank white papers or new loves, but might just encounter an old God who orders and transforms love. A God made known not only in the breaking of the bread, but in the bodies of the broken, for whom we are being formed, for whom we are becoming. Thank you.
Brewer, thank you so much for that presentation. So thoughtful. And again, I'm continually impressed by the depth of your reflection of the intersection of your faith and the practice of medicine, and just how well-read you are, and the pulling in seamlessly of, you know, great poets and authors, artists. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Really a masterclass in how to do this well. So there are 15 minutes about for us to engage with Brewer a bit. So please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. If you don't feel comfortable asking the question publicly, you can send it to myself or Adam in the chat. But yeah, as we've always tried to do, we've tried to prioritize learners. So if you are a learner, jump right in, ask a question, and we'll get started. Angela.
Hey, Brewer, good to see you.
Hey, Angela, good to see you, man.
I'm wondering, as you look back on your residency training, in what ways have these themes of beauty, belonging, and bread, like in what ways do you think that they kind of showed up in your like personal journey through residency? And as you look back, what are maybe some opportunities where you think back and say like, like having this framework could have been helpful in navigating this thing that I struggled with in residency?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Love all those questions. Well, I guess I didn't say this in my comments, but I ran the Phronesis project as a second and third year resident for our medical students there. And then I started a clinical conference series called Arete, which was more kind of classic noon conference fare. So not as much this kind of thick placemaking hospitality vision where you're, you know, renting an upper room at a brewery, and it's very intentionally displaced from the academic healthcare space, not as an antagonistic approach to it, but again, because of the vision of something running parallel in a spirit of kind of vulnerability and connection, such that those loves might then be taken back to the work. So you're not escaping the real world to go do this precious thing. You're going to be formed in a kind of alternative school of love from which you will take your love back to the fields, to quote Barry. So that language being very intentional, that we're not trying to escape what's happening. We're trying to actually lean further in and engage. I think looking back, as a kind of 10,000 foot view of all these different projects and how they connect, that's how the Bread, Beauty, Belonging framework kind of precipitated. It was born of reflecting together with folks here at TMC, but also friends who are not involved in this TMC community at all, which is what it's what we found to be so compelling about the vision. So Columbia Character Cooperative, which is run by my dear friend and mentor, Lydia Dugdale, and Ash Moyse, who I think Angola, and others on this call I know, but they're doing the same thing, right? So thick moral discourse centered around shared meals for students and residents, in which they're holding out third things around which they might form their most enduring questions of practice. Partnerships with moral and virtuous exemplars to which the learner might apprentice themselves. But I think looking back, Angela, it's realizing, like, I spent a lot of time on crafting the perfect curricula. And I think what I learned over time is that the art of placemaking and hospitality really is the real work. And it's not that the curricula doesn't matter, it really does. I mean, the clarity of the questions you're asking and curating beautiful things that are somehow both potentially disruptive, but also deepen and kind of hook to delight and longing, like all that stuff matters. But I wish I'd had more eyes to see the kind of deep loneliness and hunger and thirst that undergirds all of us. But
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Angela.
Other questions from anybody? Feel free to unmute. I have one, Brewer, as we get questions. Yeah. So that phrase, I think it said is Wendell Berry about practice resurrection. Like that's the second time this week someone has said that to me. One was sort of previously privately by email, and then I heard you say that phrase again today, and I never heard that before. And I just wonder what that means to you, to practice resurrection. Obviously as a physician, I think if I didn't have the hope in like the making of all things new with all like the sick, wounded patients that I see that are like, many of them are not going to find like a cure on the side of heaven, right? To like believe in the power of like resurrected bodies as a doctor is like super, super comforting to me. But what does it mean to practice resurrection? Like that's those two words together I never heard juxtaposed. I'm just wondering what, like, you've thought about this more than a week. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I love that. Man, I have lots of thoughts flooding my mind right now. Well, first off, I should say it comes from Wendell Berry's Mad Farmers Liberation Front Manifesto, which is another poem that if you've not read, I strongly encourage pulling it up on your phone right now and just pinging it for later. It's one of those, it's worth memorizing. I think to say it maybe abstractly or intellectually, though I hope it doesn't remain in that space, is like looking, always practicing, always walking and speaking with a vision for places in which something is dead and is desperately hoping to come alive again, whether that's in a patient or in a wounded learner. And I mean that on like an individual level, but also on like a institutional level. Like, where is there a dead thing here that could come alive? Where is there a stone heart that is crying out to be enfleshed? And what might it mean for me to participate in the renewal of all things? And again, just speaking very confessionally and candidly as a Christian, to participate in the coming resurrection, to breathe new life into people and projects as they present themselves to me. That's kind of what immediately I would say. So in the room with a patient, it's sort of looking with an eye towards the dead or stone-hearted thing within my patient that is longing for healing or renewal. And then in places where there is no possibility of cure outside of the miraculous, to practice the kind of attention and hope that the women who walk to the tomb practice, kind of slow, intentional coming alongside of the one who actually has yet to rise. Yeah, and then I'll say I'll share this. We're going through a difficult season where the word resurrection is taking on a very potent and personal meaning that I have not tasted before. Our fourth baby, who my wife is pregnant with, we just confirmed through a series of tests and ultrasounds and all the things that come with this, that our little one, who we've named Rowan, has trisomy 13 and kind of has the more aggressive features one would expect from that diagnosis, such that he will likely die in the first few days of life. So we're about to walk into that valley together over the next several months. And so does that mean that that my wife and I are walking into these months hopeful for new life? I would say no, that would not be quite the right way to say it. It would be something more like welcoming new life as it is come to us, and to walk alongside of that new life in a kind of fullness of grief and love, a kind of entangled combination of thick metaphysical claims about truth and hope and what is yet to come, and then also a kind of thick spiritual tenderness and awareness and sort of constant waiting and open-handedness to each day. So I know that sounds quite precious, and it's more abstracted and poetic than I would prefer. I'm a family doc. At the end of the day, I'm often kind of like, what are we going to do here? But yeah, it is a practice bound to hope.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing about your baby. So sorry.
Yeah, thanks. Us too.
I think we have time for one more question. I think Tina had their hand up. Tina, did you have your hand up?
It was an accidental hit. I was actually
Okay.
trying to hit the chat message.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Brewer, just about the story he was telling. So.
And then we'll take our final question from Dr. Kistler. Mark, go ahead.
Thanks so much. Brewer, it's always great to hear you talk. I really love and admire the way that you embody your ideas when you speak and I'm sure when you practice. So thank you for that. I was curious a little bit, just kind of looking forward from this. I was just at a pediatric ethics conference, and I was surprised that several of the ethicists seem to locate in professional societies the same kind of hope for a front porch or a communal dialogue or an orienting ethos that you're talking about here. And I've never really thought of a professional society as supplying that in medicine. And so I'm curious about this tension between kind of this more secular desire to have a professional society that orients us, even in a space of dialogue, and this aesthetic of quiet dissent. Are we building something different and parallel? Are we building something that can be in some ways secularized and speaking into medicine at large? And how do you deal with that tension?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, so much. Man, I'm reading Seeing Like a State right now, which the subtitle is How Certain Attempts to Improve the Human Condition Have Failed. It's a great book. But I think what I find fascinating about it so far is that there's this tension between sort of high modernist ideology attempts to, through administration and through scientific progress, improve the human condition at an institutional level. And that's, I come from a space in which we're probably too quick to criticize that, right? Like medicine is in fact an institution that more or less even for all its brokenness and bluster, is serving and really. We have a little one in our life group right now who is getting a bone marrow transplant in 3 days, and that's a great thing, right? It's incredible. It's incredible, this person who's giving their bone marrow. It's incredible, this little one in our midst who can receive that, and all the complexity of that. Our MFM doctor, just the kindness and care she showed us a few weeks ago. Beautiful, good. The problem is that, institutions are always going to try to instrumentalize and bureaucratize and kind of cadastral map all these little human beauties that necessarily depend on kind of the institution depends on drawing from local adaptation kind of friction spaces to draw the themes from which they then try to top down from an institutional level. So I don't know how to resolve the tension you're talking about, except to say that they both exist in this very strange relationship where, the Hippocratic tradition, right, being in some sense born out of a moral micro society that changed the wider culture of medicine. And so it's probably the case that small moral micro societies are always emerging at a kind of grassroots level, and then kind of leavening the bread, the wider ecosystem, creating a different moral ecology. But then our human desire for control and sort of utopia kicks in, and then you generate the very thing that produces another moral micro society that tries to then reform. So I don't know if that's a dismal, kind of cynical hope against progress, or if it's more the kind of Tolkien in me who would say we're always going to be fighting the long defeat, and what I just said is going to not apply in 10 years because there'll be some new moral micro society emerging from Anjola and the world he will be building. Yeah, not a very satisfying answer. This is the kind of thing I'd love to pick your brain on with other folks on this call and kind of explore together. Can you reform an institution? Does it require the whole thing to kind of start over? Do you need a monastic medical school? What would that even look like? Do you need like a reemergence of guild traditions in medicine? Does the direct primary care world I inhabit, like the limits of that, because it is limited, even though it might be a bright light in a broken space. So I'm rambling.
Thank you.
It's really good. So thank you all so much for participating. And actually, we were, Adam and I were we broke bread last night with some of our graduating student fellows out for dinner. And we talked about all the serious, like very intense things, which was like super great and fun. And I was telling the group last night that I'm reviewing a book that's coming out called Benedict Medicine. We were talking about the Benedict option.
Oh, wow.
Actually,
Yeah, cool.
a physician. So like some of these themes we just were talking about, but yeah, it'd be great to talk about these things more together at some point, God willing. So friends, sadly, we have come to the end of our time together. And Brewer, thanks so much, brother, for such a thought-provoking presentation. We really appreciate your time and sharing with us about your family and your work and the love that you have for everyone you encounter. It's really inspiring. I hope our paths cross again soon in real life.
Me too. It's been a gift to be with all of you, truly, truly.
Same, brother. Thanks so much, everyone. Hope everyone has a great day. Bye, friends.